Hey guys, welcome back to my Consciously Cultured YouTube channel. My name is Caitlin and my aim is to get you fermenting at home. Today I wanted to talk about fermentation vessels, what I recommend you fermenting in when you first get started, what you can progress to, what I wouldn't recommend. Obviously this is just from my own experience. You can do your own research after the video and find what works best for you. But for me personally, I love fermenting in more natural materials. So whether that's glass, ceramics, wood, things that we would have fermented in for hundreds of years, if not for thousands in the case of, wood and ceramics. I know that people do ferment in food grade plastic. That is very common. You can get kimchi boxes, people will ferment in big plastic barrels. For me, I'm not a massive fan of fermenting in plastic. You are creating an acidic environment, and I know they're food grade, but for me it just doesn't sit right with me. So glass, wood or ceramics are definitely what I would recommend. More commercial producers sometimes will ferment in stainless steel. Obviously it does have to be stainless steel. You don't want to be fermenting in any old metal, because you are adding salt and creating acidity that can create rust and leaching. So you do need to be careful with that. For the ferments that I make to sell though, I make in German ceramic crock pots, similar to this one, but on a bigger scale. I love them. And as I mentioned, I love the wood, and I will ferment smaller batches in glass as well. So when you first get started, it doesn't need to be an expensive hobby. You probably have, old jam jars or old pickle jars at the back of your fridge. Once they're used up, you can give those a wash with hot soapy water, a good rinse, let them air dry, and you've got yourself a fermentation vessel. Anything that you can kind of close the lid on tight to create that nice anaerobic environment is going to work. So here is just an example of an old kimchi jar that I sell my ferments in. You can use these work great as well. Obviously these tend to be in the smaller sizes, so if you really get into fermenting, you can then kind of invest in kilner style jars. So the clip top jars as seen here. Obviously they have a nice rubber seal. You can pull this out to burp your jar during the fermentation process. You've got your clip top there, preventing any oxygen getting in the jar. And these come in various different sizes as well, which is really great. So you can increase the amount you're making as you build your confidence with it. The reason I love glass as well for beginners is that you can see what's happening in your jar. You can see the little bubbles starting to shoot up as fermentation starts happening. You can also see if anything's going wrong, any discoloration, any mold. You can see things every step of the way during that fermentation process, which I think as you're building your confidence, it's really important to see that process. When you're fermenting in ceramics and wood, it's obviously dark. You can't really see exactly what's going on. So I would say those kind of vessels are good for once you are really confident with the process, you can then invest in something like this. You can also get special fermentation vessels that I've actually never used, but they're essentially glass jars that have a plastic twist top lid with a little button which allows you to release any gases. You can also get fermentation vessels that have little gas valves on the top. You fill them with water, and it means when your jar is fermenting, CO2 is a byproduct. You don't have to release it yourself by undoing the jar. The gas valve does it for you, and the water kind of pushes through. So there's something you can look into too. I don't bother. If I'm fermenting in glass, I'll just stick with the readily available and slightly cheaper kilner style glasses, or just my old jam jar or pickle jar. If you really get into fermentation, I really recommend trialing the like wooden fermentation barrels. You can buy them on Etsy and various other websites online. Have a look for those. Or the ceramic crock pots. So there are kind of two main types, and they kind of, different ceramicists will make different designs. But I use the traditional German ceramic crock pots that are a little urn-like shape, and it's an example of a mini one here. You would pack them in the exact same way as your glass jar. But the great thing about this is once you popped your weight in, you have a little moat across the top here. So once you've packed all your bits in the jar, you would just simply put your lid on, and you would add a little bit of water in the moat here, and it creates a suction seal. So, you haven't got any oxygen getting into the jar. And also it means that as the CO2 is produced, the lid will kind of go up by itself, do a little bloop, and self-burp, which is amazing. They're dark, so it means you don't have to be as careful about keeping your ferment out of direct sunlight. They're a little bit thicker as well, so they maintain more of a constant temperature. You'll also find Korean versions for making kimchi. They would have fermented their kimchi in ceramic bulbous crock pots known as ongis. They're a little bit more rounded in shape, but similar process there with that one. So I really do like the ceramics. They're really beautiful as well to have sat on your kitchen counter. There's one jar that I always forget to mention when I ask people to bring jars for my fermentation workshops, and these are the Kilner canning jars. So they are glass, which is obviously great, but it's the lid that can cause some problems. So just excuse the rust on this. This is just an example for you. So this jar is actually a canning jar. So when you're canning, you are basically creating a suction seal where you don't want any oxygen at all getting into that jar in order to prevent spoilage. So you basically heat the jar and its contents to the point where this suctions down, and you remove the ring, and you can then store this in your cupboard. When you use this for fermenting, what can happen is as the CO2 is produced, when you undo this lid to burp, sometimes this lid has suctioned on, and then it will just randomly ping in your face, which is less than ideal. I have had it in the face, and it wasn't great. I'd also say with these jars as well, when on my workshops, I like to recommend using a core of cabbage sat slightly above the edge of the jar, so that when you put your lid on, it kind of pushes all the vegetables down and keeps it submerged under the brine. With this, you can't really do, because this lid is slightly bendy. So when you try and push your veggies down, it doesn't work quite as well. So I'm not a massive fan of these canning jars. If you do have jars like this with these canning lids with the cap and the ring, you can actually buy like solid lids like the one on this jar to fit on these, so you don't have to discard the whole jar. You just need to replace the lid for that one. Anyway, that is a rundown of fermentation vessels and what I like to use. It'd be great to hear what fermentation vessels you use, what you recommend. Please comment below. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe. And I'm hoping to do more videos like this one. Anyway, happy fermenting, and see you soon. Bye.